And thank you for everyone's patience, and thank you for your time to join the Sedex Asia Pacific Conference for today. And now we're going to start our session 1, Why Respond Business Matter. And first of all, I'd like to thank you everyone's support on our conference, especially thank you for our first moderator, whether it's Tara Demet from International Organization for Migrants from the Hong Kong office. So, and Tara is a very rich experienced professional in migrants workers and a very good speakers. So I'd like to hand over to Tara to kick off the session. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Walter. And thank you to Sedex for hosting and to all of you for joining such an important and timely event. As introduced, my name is Tara Dermott, and I am the head of the International Organization for Migration office here in Hong Kong. IOM is the United Nations Migration Agency, and we have 70 years of experience providing direct assistance to migrant populations and guiding migration policy. I am here today because we work closely with business to protect migrant workers in supply chains and operations across the Asia-Pacific region. It is an honor to be moderating this session on why responsible business matters. For many, when they think business, they think profit. But increasingly, businesses are also concerned with their impact on people and the planet. This should come as no surprise to any of us. Businesses are led by people, for people, and within communities. As people, it's virtually impossible to use social media or to read the news without coming across rallying cries for change. Youth demanding that we act now to slow climate change for generations to come. Communities demanding systemic change for gender and racial equality. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated weaknesses and vulnerabilities in our institutions. Some businesses have been hit hard. Others have found new opportunities at the forefront of the response. In all cases, the shock of COVID-19 to our collective systems has also provided us with an opportunity to reflect and perhaps even reset, to change business as usual, to become more resilient, and yes, more responsible. This recognition of the role that business plays to protect our environment, promote human rights, and to influence global and systemic change for good is all wrapped up in responsible business. A simple definition for responsible business is that business is ethical, efficient, meets or exceeds regulation, and that it cares about people and the environment. When discussing responsible business, there are a lot of terms that are used. SDGs for the Sustainable Development Goals, and ESG for environmental, social, and corporate governance issues. Both provide frameworks by which diverse stakeholders can track positive contributions and change. Our speakers in today's session will shed light on the significance of these measures and many other resources and guidance available. What I will say for now is that increasing evidence shows a strong, positive relationship between consideration for sustainability issues and financial performance, which means that the adoption of responsible business practice has become less a question of philanthropy than practicality. This is good news because we are currently facing an unprecedented health, economic, and social crisis threatening lives and livelihoods. A transformation of financial, economic, and political systems that govern our societies is necessary for us to recover and to achieve our sustainability goals for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. Our speakers today represent the very stakeholders that are taking this transformation forward, sharing why they know that responsible business matters and how everyone here can join this movement. So with us today is Meng Liu, Head of Asia Pacific Networks for the United Nations Global Compact, Brian Chan, Human Rights and Workplace Director for the Coca-Cola Company, Mons Carlson, Head of ESG Research, Ausbil Investment Management, Jingjing Chen, China Lead for the Center for Responsible Business Conduct, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So I will now ask each of the speakers to give an introductory presentation. I'm going to hand over to Meng Liu first, who will open by telling us more about the UNGC.
Thank you so much, Tara, for the kind introduction. And it's really my great pleasure to speak at Sedex conference today. let me share my presentation. I hope everyone can see it. Great. And this is Meng Liu, head for Asia Pacific Networks of the UN Global Compact. I invite all the participants today to imagine about 20 years ago. Probably when you mention about United Nations, you wouldn't think about, private sector's engagement. Indeed, in 1999, at the world with very similar background as today, with many isms are rising, especially there is a sentiment that against globalization. And at that time, a very visionary leader, the former UN Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, really made a great breakthrough and innovation within the UN system, where he proposed that the business leaders and we, the United Nations, to initiate a global compact of shared values and principles, which will give a human face to the global market. And these are indeed trying to address the many disadvantages that globalization has brought to us, but maximize also the sustainable development dividend to benefit the environment, society, and all. At the core of the United Nations Global Compact are our 10 universal principles, and they cover the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. We basically ask companies to do two things. I would summarize the first as internalization, where we call on all private sector players to integrate these 10 Global Compact principles into their strategies and operation. Second is externalization, really facilitating companies to come together to have dialogues, learning, and partnerships to advance our joint goals, which in current case is the 2030 agenda, the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Well, at the UN Global Compact, we are advocating for a principle-based approach. So to make sure when you are making progress on certain goals, you don't impact or hurt the achievement of other goals. So this is really fundamental in driving corporate participation and contribution to the SDGs. So since the launch of the SDGs back in 2015, after 4 years, although there are many progress being made, but still, unfortunately, we're not on track to deliver many of the important goals. I recall Tara mentioned earlier about gender issues. So according to a UN report, it will take over 250 years to close the economic gender gap, which is really striking. And still, we have 8 million tons of plastics enters the ocean, and climate change is still affecting our life and many aspects of our society. And this is even more severe with the impact of COVID indeed. Luckily, till today, the UN Global Compact continues to be the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. We have companies from over 160 countries, with number reaching over 11,000 of them committed to the 10 principles of UN Global Compact. We also have over 3,000 non-business and other stakeholder members coming together, willing to partner with business to advance our joint goals to create the world we all want tomorrow. So we really help companies to build trust and transparency, and we are also committed to help achieve your sustainability objectives. And collectively, we are convening the platform to convene all the stakeholders to come together and shape the global corporate sustainability agenda. Here, I just want to share a few examples about guidance we have developed to help build the capacity for business to be able to the positive change maker for sustainable development. Here you can see on climate issues, we have provided water stewardship tool and also how to set science-based target, etc. So after the SDG has been launched, what does it mean really for the 169 targets? We developed the guidance to help business to further understand, measure, and take action. After COVID, we're also looking into how to build a sustainable and resilient healthcare infrastructure, which is basic needed everywhere, including developing and developed countries, in order to accelerate the SDGs. We also created a Global Compact Academy, which is an online learning tool and platform for companies to take a lot of classes covering different topics on sustainability to improve their sustainable efforts. And here also comes the gender gap analysis tool, which companies can utilizing them to evaluate at which status and stage you are in terms of close the gender gap to benefit your long-term sustainable development goals. Probably also most relevant to this conference today convened by Sedex. We have developed decent work toolkit for sustainable procurement, really help to enable procurement officers and your suppliers to improve working conditions and ensure decent work throughout your supply chains. We welcome companies to utilize all these tools, and they are available on UN Global Compact website. The way we organize our issue work is really framed in the format of action platforms, where we help shape the definition of leadership, and we need business leadership on every critical sustainability issues. And we invite companies to participate in time-bound action plans, really to address the sustainability challenges and support achievement of the global goals. And we provide a platform to help engage with different stakeholders that have the power and influence to move sectors and peers into the right direction. And last but not least, we encourage you to utilize the unique assets of the UN Global Compact really to make the business case for responsible business globally. And here I quickly share one very concrete example. It's a recent action platform the UN Global Compact has launched, emphasizing on sustainable infrastructure, where we're going to look into 8 major infrastructure sectors that have the biggest impact on SDGs. So we welcome your continued engagement and participation. At the end of the day, business can only survive and thrive with a good enabling environment to reward sustainable companies. Indeed, at the first ever virtual UN General Assembly meeting, the UN Global Compact CEO, Ms. Sandra Ojambo, presented to the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, a joint statement signed by over 1,200 chief executive officers. And this statement is really appeal from the business communities for renewed global collaboration and show their strong support for inclusive multilateralism, which is critical for the long-term success of business and global collaboration. So we welcome your continued engagement and together creating this sustainable enabling environment for business to continue to operate and grow in a very sustainable manner. So please join us and engage with us, and we are here ready to support your sustainable sustainability journey to create a better world for all of us. Thank you.
From the IOM's perspective, I was delighted that Coca-Cola has seen the area of recruitment of migrant workers as a priority area for intervention. So I was happy to see that. And it was also great to see the emphasis that's put on human rights due diligence in terms of recognizing the role of Coca-Cola as an enabler, and that no one business can do this alone. So it's important to engage with all of your suppliers, your business partners, your peers. So as you said, there was a wealth of information and things there, and so looking forward to unpacking it a bit more with you in the discussion. But for now, I'd like to invite Jing from the OECD's Responsible Business, for the Center for Responsible Business, to tell us a bit more about your work. Jing, if you can share your slides now.
Thank you, Tara, and hello, everyone. I try to put on my screen first. Did you see it right? Can you see my slides?
Not yet. There, yes.
Okay, great. So I'm very happy to join you from the virtual OECD conference center today. And first, I would like to thank Sedex for the kind invitation. Asia Pacific is one of the most active region in terms of the economic development in the world. And also it has a very special and important role, and more important in today's context in the supply chain globally. So we really appreciate today's opportunity to exchange our views with you on this important topic. I'm trying to get to the next slide. Okay, I hope you can see. Before diving into the RBC issues, please allow me to give you a very brief overview of the OECD itself, which I hope will help you understand better our ways of working and also see where the RBC sits overall. Today we have 37 members, and we also have the European Commissions joining with other members sitting in our council, the highest decision-making body. And we have the memberships from really across the world, although we don't have that large number of the members. So from Asia Pacific, obviously, to Northern America, Latin America, but also Europe. And we do not only work with the member countries. As you can see there, I highlighted in red. In fact, on some topics like tax, for example, the OECD is working with more than 145 countries across the globe. And that's through different, let's say, like engagement programs. For example, we have active regional programs, and we have ongoing country program, for example, with Thailand. And we also work closely with key partner countries such as China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, and South Africa. And our ways of working really relies on the committee structure. For the RBC issue, we have a working party on the responsible business conduct, where all the adherent countries send their experts who understand not only the policy leverage, but also the technical issues to our meetings and dialogues, which really help we channel the policy discussion into actions and implementation. And the OECD's work on responsible business conduct, here I called it in short RBC, is delivered through the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct. We work with governments, business, workers, and civil society to promote the implementation of the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. Despite its name, I have to say it may not be the perfect name in the world. In fact, we do work with all sizes of businesses, including SMEs, not just the MNEs, and the business of different legal status as well. And the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, it's first released in 1976. I think in Brian's presentation, you have a very nice diagram showing the, like mapping out all the initiatives. In fact, since 76, our guidelines has been updated 5 times, and the current and the latest edition was reviewed in 2011, where most importantly to mention that we integrate the due diligence guidance, the due diligence approach to really trying to promote the sustainability in the supply chains. And these are the recommendation by government to business, how to concretely do their work on the ground, but that's obviously not enough. Therefore, the OECD, under the umbrella of the guidelines, we have been developing the due diligence guidance for specific sectors, but also in 2018, we have a general one, and settled, all sectors can apply one due diligence guidance to really try to bring all the most important messages there, and also frame it in a Q&A style. So it's like a very concrete questions and trying to answer, give our answer in interpreting how business should interpret expectation from the governments. So that's a very practical tool for the businesses. And as Meng Liu from UNGC already mentioned, it's a policy area with a very broad, I would say, the broad relevance to all important topics of our society, our planet. So you can see here on the right side the 9 topics covered by the OECD guidelines. So it's not only the human rights and labor and issues.
Kita pakai Zoom.
Sorry, is that?
I think you're okay, Jingjing. Please continue. Oh, now you're on mute. Please unmute yourself, Jingjing.
Okay,
Great.
I hope I'm back. Okay. Okay, let me just try to continue. So not just the labor issue and human rights, of course, are a very important focus, but of course you can see here the environment issues and also consumer interests, which are also touched base by previous speakers also, and science and technology indeed are also the aspects that we are covering. And we try to be as to bring the simple tour for the business. So if the audience is not familiar with our work, I hope this circle explains a little bit how we, in our perspective, we would like to explain our approach to due diligence and the responsible business. It's already mentioned by Meng Liu. The most important to start for us is to really embed responsible business conduct into the policies and the management system, and also making sure that there is a leadership holding like a credible for the implementation. And this circle, although I mark with the numbers, it should not be expected as a linear process. It's an ongoing and dynamic process, and it is a process which we expect the companies will also take into account of the importance of communicating their work. For example, in handling or like in talking to stakeholders and handling the remediation, the work as well. This is a touch base already by Brian. And also one of the most important characteristic there is, this is a framework we really hope can prevent any risk, the risk to the environment, to the people, and to our society, but not framework to really address the risk already happened. And as I said already, we do have the sector due diligence guidance to complete our work on the more general level. And so far we have developed the guidance for the agriculture sector, garment and footwear sector, and also the mineral sectors. But more to mention, you already mentioned by Tara also, the financial sector is playing a very important role to really promote this work. So we are now also working on the financial sector, and we hope to also address the project level financing as well as a concrete angle. And the OECD, how we take actions to really help companies to implement RBC. Already to start, of course, we have our members, and so today we have 49 adherents to the OECD M&E guidelines. And we have a very unique implementation mechanism for national contact points. Every country who adhere to these guidelines has the responsibility to set up a national contact point. It's a mechanism to promote the guideline, but also it has a unique function as a non-judicial mechanism to handle grievance. And we also contribute to the multilateral and international efforts. For example, under the G20, we are contributing to the infrastructure agenda, and our work is specifically included under the Principle 6 to enhance the sustainability in the infrastructure governance. And we are also contributing to the child labor and human trafficking agenda. For example, in 2019, we worked with IOM, UNICEF, and ILO, and we published a report, the Alliance 8.7 report, which helped inform the discussion at the G20. And of course, we work also closely with ASEAN. In 2019, in fact, our OECD Global Forum on Responsible Business Conduct is held in Thailand, in Bangkok, and in cooperation with the Thai presidency of ASEAN. And I will also give you more information of our regional program, which can show the breadth of our work in country. But it's also important to already mention here. We do not only work with one or two specific stakeholders. We work with a multi-stakeholder approach, working with government, CSOs, and organizations such as Sedex, but also directly with the business. And when it comes to the regional or country level, so far we have an active program in Asia and also in LAC. The audience of today is from the Asia Pacific, so I will focus on the Asian program. Under this responsible supply chain in Asia project, we have 6 countries covered: China, Japan, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And for each of the countries, we have specific focus sector. So here you can find information from the bar in blue. And electronics and vehicle parts are for Japan, for example, and also for the SEA countries, there is a strong focus on the agriculture sector. And how we work to promote the RBC through this project is by working with local partners, but also international partners, as this is a program supported by the EU and also co-implemented by the OECD and the International Labour Organization. And here is how we concretely develop or design our work programs. So there are 4 pillars of the activities. By doing research, we try to map or map out the environment in the country. And also we try to have more dialogue with the policymakers to address or the challenge how to really we can have an enabling environment for business. And more directly with the business, we organize capacity training workshops and also the outreach activities with representatives from business groups and the companies. Of course, awareness, maybe I should start from this point. It should be the starting point, but I think in today's complex world, and especially after COVID and having a lot of the shocks in both sides of the supply chain, companies are really realizing RBC is a strategic choice for them, and will help them to build the long-term resilience and the long-term to gain the long-term value. So I hope I will have more time to explain more our work in details in the Q&A session.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jingjing. It was a wonderful overview of OECD and the incredibly relevant work that you are doing. I especially appreciated that you flagged the need for a multi-stakeholder approach, and definitely in the discussion we will want to hear a little bit more about your experience with engaging governments in this region. But now I would like to invite Måns Carlson to share his slides. Last but not least, Måns is bringing really important perspective from the investor community to our discussion today.
Hi, thank you, Tara, and thank you for having me here today. So before we start talking about this topic in great detail, let me just quickly introduce Ausbil Investment Management and what we do. So if you can skip ahead 2 slides, please. Perfect, thank you. So for those who don't know much about Ausbil, we're an investment manager based in Sydney, Australia. We have about 11 billion Australian dollars in assets under management, and we're part owned by New York Life, and we have an experienced team of investment professionals and a good track record across the different investment cycles. And as a house, we mainly invest in Australian equities, but we also have some global equity portfolios as well. And importantly for today and the discussion, we integrate ESG across all our portfolios. So if you can skip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide is just showing one back, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, perfect, thanks. So this slide is just showing our investment process. We apply a top-down and bottom-up approach, including 4 stages, starting with macroeconomic analysis, followed by sectoral analysis, and then stock selection, and then portfolio construction. So 4 different steps. And environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, it can be part of all the 4 different stages, but the majority of it, of course, is done at the stock selection phase. And now ESG integration can mean quite different things to different people, depending on who you speak to. So on the next slide, I'd like to show you how we do that at Ausbil. So you can skip to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So there are 2 things that we think about. First of all is, we think ESG integration can make better informed investment decisions. Because ESG issues can be quite complex, they can be misunderstood, mispriced by the market, and by taking these factors into account, we think we can make better informed investment decisions. And the second thing is active ownership or engagement on ESG issues. So as active managers, of course, we have a vested interest in ensuring companies that we invest in are doing well on ESG matters, because we think that's going to lead to premium valuation over time. And we want to protect our invested capital, so we frequently are in a dialogue with the companies we invest in on ESG matters. What makes Ausbil a bit unique, I guess, is that we, rather than buying ESG research externally, we have our own team internally that produces ESG research. And we do that because we think that's the best way for us to find unique insights that we can trade on. And I'm happy to go through examples later on. And so our team of ESG specialists, we participate in the meetings with the companies we invest in. We also participate in all the investment team meetings. And among other things, we've developed a proprietary human rights risk assessment tool that assesses companies' risk exposure and also their risk management. And that's quite helpful for us in terms of guiding and prioritizing our engagement activities. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through that now, but I'm happy to talk more about it later on. So if we can go to the next slide again, please. So human rights from an investor perspective. Now, when I say ESG or environmental, social, and governance matters, obviously that covers a wide range of topics and factors for us. I think historically, it's fair to say that investors at large have probably focused more on the E in the ESG, so environmental issues, particularly climate change. And of course, that remains a big topic for us now too, and so do other environmental issues too. I think recycling and the circular economy and waste management, they're going to be big topics that will attract more investor attention going forward. But if we focus on labour rights and human rights for now, as with any ESG issue, I think it's really important that when you integrate ESG, you need to do that in a way that aligns with your own investment philosophy. Otherwise, it's just going to be like a standalone item or an overlay thing. So our investment philosophy at Ausbil is quite simple. We think that earnings revisions drive share prices. And then we also have a preference for companies with sustainable earnings and companies with quality management. So we think there's a natural link between those three things and ESG. And if I go back to 2016, I wrote a, sorry, can we just go back to one slide? Sorry, perfect, thank you. I wrote an investor statement on slavery. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted to highlight how this is more than just an ethical issue for us investors. And while that statement specifically targets slavery, it also widely applies to other types of labour rights issues and human rights issues. So first you have brand risk, particularly for consumer-facing companies. It's obviously time-consuming and costly to restore, and it can lead to revenue loss. But to me, the very heart of this comes down to earning sustainability. So if a company has a business model or a supply chain that relies on underpaid workers, weak regulation, or even illegal activities like slavery, most likely those earnings are not going to be sustainable over time. So it's definitely more than just an ethical issue for us. And I'd also argue that the way a company deals with supply chain can be quite good, a good proxy for management quality. So for instance, if you speak to the management of a company and you realize they don't understand the risks in their supply chain, or even worse, which has happened sometimes, they don't understand their supply chain at all. It makes you wonder as an investor, what else should I worry about? And another point, of course, is increased regulation. So we've seen and will continue to see increased regulation on human rights issues, most notably modern slavery acts. We've seen the one in the UK, and in Australia 2 years ago, we passed our own modern slavery act here. And there's more to come, I think. We have talked about the UN SDGs already today, and I just want to flag that the UN SDGs aim to eradicate slavery by 2030. So of course, that's going to translate into more laws going forward. And on the SDGs, from an investor perspective, I just want to make the point that those have actually been backed by the PRI, or the Principles for Responsible Investment. And that's the largest body for responsible investments in the world. So that makes the SDGs quite valid for investors too. If you can then go to the next slide, please. I want to talk a bit about engagement. So as I mentioned before, we want to protect our invested capital, and we prefer engagement over divestment of companies, because sometimes divestments can actually lead to unintended consequences. Of course, there are cases where if a company refuses to engage with us or refuses to rectify an issue, we might consider divestment. And I think a lot of investors are similar in that regard. We also think the success of engagement with companies really comes down to the way we engage. We want to be very consultative in our engagement style. And currently we focus on three things. So first, we want to encourage companies to adopt what we think is best in class risk management. And I'll talk more about that later on. Another one is the Australian Modern Slavery Act. I'm not going to cover that today because that's very Australian centric. And the third thing is we want companies to try to address underlying issues. And when I say underlying issues, they can be things like living wages, lack of union representation, and greater collaboration as well. So if I focus on best-in-class approach, well, for me, as an ESG researcher, I've been to a number of field trips and to visit factories in several Asian countries. And by speaking to workers, of course, you can understand their position. And by speaking to unions, you can get a feel for some of the complexities of the issues, and more importantly, further down in the supply chain. But obviously, when you go on a field trip like I do as an investor, I'm never going to see the worst factories, because then they know I'm coming. So I get to see the best factories. But sometimes that's very valuable too, because I can learn as an investor what leading companies are doing in this field. And then I can encourage other companies to adopt those measures as well. There's a lot of things that we are encouraging companies to do. And on this slide here, I've mentioned a few of those. So we're part of something called the Responsible Investment Association Australasia, or RIA. And they have a human rights working group, which I'm currently chairing. And 2 years ago, we published something called the RIA Human Rights Working Group Investor Toolkit. It's available on our website if anyone wants to have a look. But what we really want to do was to encourage companies to take a number of different steps, which we think are best in class. They include a number of practical steps, which are probably too time consuming to go through here today. But things like consolidating the supply chain, sourcing more from fewer suppliers where that's practical, and incentivize suppliers that comply by giving them more business. And also aligning the KPIs for the ethical or responsible sourcing team on the one hand and the procurement team on the other, if they're separate, just to make sure there's no conflict of interest there. We also encourage a lot more collaboration with NGOs and other stakeholders. And ultimately, we think it comes down to building better long-term relationships with suppliers. And we think leading companies spend more time on the ground working directly with their suppliers, which is, of course, quite hard to do in this COVID environment. But if I go to the next slide, please. I was going to talk a bit about the Modern Slavery Act in Australia, but I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that because I think we're running slightly ahead of time anyway. So I just want to make one note about the Modern Slavery Act here. It's the fact that it actually applies to us investors, right? So rather than just companies reporting on modern slavery, we as investors need to report on the risk of slavery and human rights issues in the companies we invest in. And I think that's a big pioneering step in Australia versus the UK Modern Slavery Act. And I can see similar developments in the future in other countries as well. So we think investors can have a role to play, a big role, particularly by engaging with companies we invest in. And this reporting requirement certainly will make investors take this issue more seriously going forward. And yeah, so I think there'll be lots of more questions from investors on human rights and modern slavery going forward. In the interest of time, I think I might leave it there. So thank you for listening, and back to you, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mons. I actually have so many questions for you because I think you brought a really rare and unique perspective to this discussion. We don't often get to hear, and it's so important. And as you said, I think historically, and not even that far back, investors have been looking more at environmental, and you flagged the issues that will continue to be very hot topics: circular economy, waste management. But I do think that this space of the role of investors to promote human rights is incredibly important. And so I'm very glad that you are here and equipped to speak about it. But yeah, so we have about 30 minutes remaining for discussion. And so I will definitely be going back to each of our presenters today for at least one question, hopefully a couple. And my first question is actually for Meng Liu, because we haven't heard from her for a little while. So Meng, in telling us about the UN Global Compact and hearing from all the other speakers, it's clear that responsible business, this movement, is growing in traction. And so it would be wonderful to hear directly from you and the experience of the Global Compact with your members here. What kinds of specific actions or programs do you have in place in the Asia Pacific region to support companies that may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed or a little bit lost about making this commitment to sustainability?
Thank you, Tara. This is a very important question indeed. As I introduced earlier, the UN Global Compact, we currently have globally around 12,000 corporate participants. And really in the Asia Pacific region, we have around over 1,700 corporations engaged with us. And I would say in order to really embrace sustainability and achieve the SDGs, the companies, private sector from Asia and Africa are key. And the truth is, if we look around the globe, really there are more talking and less actions, and there are plenty of goodwill there, but there are shortage of tools and guidances for the companies. So what to do? Really, in order to maximize the positive impact in the last decade, which means from 2020 to 2030, before the SDG expires, the UN Global Compact, we decided to take a sectorial approach by first looking at which sector has the biggest footprint and impact on the SDGs. And according to a World Bank report, infrastructure will impact majority of the SDGs. That means over 120 out of 169 SDG targets. Therefore, this is the sector for us to engage, considering very limited resources we have. And really looking into more details around Asia. According to Asia Development Bank, the infrastructure need will surpass, guess how much? 26 trillion US dollars in 2030. And corporations are really at the forefront of this massive infrastructure developments. So we got to engage them. Therefore, we launched about 3 months ago an action platform for business to advance sustainable infrastructure in order to accelerate SDGs. And I believe this is highly relevant to the Asia Pacific region. And we take a very close look at the Belt and Road Initiative, which faces many sustainability challenges and aims to raise the bar and support companies that participated and plan to participate in the BRI infrastructure projects to be aligned with the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact and the 17 SDGs. In my previous slides, I introduced that there are 8 major industries, including healthcare, finance, transportation, energy, construction, manufacture, agriculture, and food we identified as the key sectors under infrastructure framework. And through this action platform, we're working with companies hand in hand on embedding SDGs into, here is very important, concrete infrastructure projects underway or planned. Concrete tools, the guidance and standards will be developed by the infrastructure sector. And we're really looking forward to welcoming more Asian companies to join. In fact, we'll be sending out a survey on this, and we'll welcome our host, the Sedex, and our other partners here present here today to help reach out to more companies to start and join force in this journey. We really focus on sector approach, and we also look into future. So the global programs that we launched, including the Young SDG Innovator Program, has been rolled out already in 3 Asian countries, including Bangladesh, India, and Philippines. And another SDG campaign called SDG Pioneers has been implemented in 5 Asian countries, including Bangladesh, India, China, Malaysia, and Thailand. As these global programs really provide an opportunity for participating companies of the UN Global Compact to discover sustainability talents and really help accelerate business innovation towards the SDGs. So Tara, this is a short summary of what we have done, and we certainly do a lot more beyond, so hope this serves the purpose. So hand over to you, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Meng. And I assume that if anyone wants to join your recently launched initiative or learn more about it, they can just visit your website, is that right?
Yes, indeed.
Great, okay, all right, thank you. And now actually I'd like to turn to Jingjing. So you shared also a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciated you sort of deep diving into the supply chain programming that you are doing with the support of the EU and in partnership with ILO. So I guess also for you, can you tell us a little bit about how you have seen the responsible business conduct guidance being implemented here in APAC?
Sure, thanks, Tara. As you know, like the OECD, we don't have the big number of membership, and especially in Asia. So today we only have 4 members, like adhering to the OECD guidelines. Nevertheless, so through this Asia program, over the years we have been seeing, before I mentioned the encouraging results, I'm fully aware of the challenges ahead of me and my team. But we are seeing the promising results in engaging specifically with the stakeholders and helping them to really get the know-how, how to step-by-step adjust the risk associated with their activities, including through the supply chains and business relationships. So I think it's best to show some examples as a concrete answer. For example, in China, we work very closely with industry groups from the mineral sector, textile sector, and the electronic sector. A good example of integrating the international standard into a country level program is in 2015, the mineral industry groups in China, CCCMC, developed Chinese guidelines for responsible mineral supply chains with technical inputs from the OECD, and it's based on the OECD's due diligence guidance on responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. And it's also important to mention here that in the China context, it's important to work with the government agencies, really like in charge of like the industrial development, to promote an enabling environment for business. And here we are also providing training for the officials in the country to really having more awareness, and also they're equipped with more tools how they can support the business. And then in other countries, for example, in Thailand, the OECD and the Thai government pension funds, the second largest institutional investor in the country, formalized the cooperation in 2019. And the fund has asked the OECD to review and provide technical advice during the establishment of the pension fund's ESG framework. I think this is, maybe Mon has a better position on that to comment more. And then we also see very strong interest from the Japan Electronic Sector Industry Group, JETA, to work with the OECD, including collaborating for training modules. And then the organizations is asking its membership to participate actively in OECD capacity building activities. We have more to mention in other smaller economics in the region. They are very active, although despite the smaller economic size. For example, in Myanmar, we received the request from the business, especially in the seafood and agriculture sector, to understand more how especially SMEs can implement the OECD risk-based due diligence steps or framework. And in the Philippines, we organized the CEO seminars together with a local network, where we also received a strong call from the CEOs from the leading Filipino business, really to understand more the expectations of due diligence in their made markets, like in the European markets and in the US as well. As I said already, now we have more and more companies have understood that RBC is not a burden, but a strategic choice that can help them build resilience as well as gain both direct and long-term value. This RBC approach can result in transparent and stable supply chains, and this is important in today's context. But also, we are seeing the studies on the SDGs that companies with better SDG performance, they are having a bigger chance to receive their funding from investors, but also from maybe some governmental agencies in the recovering period after COVID. So in concluding, I think I have quite much hope in engaging more with the business, and also to work with the policymakers in creating a better environment for the business to practice their responsibility and also the sustainability agenda.
Wonderful. No, thank you so much, Jingjing. And I think it's excellent that OECD is creating such valuable guidance, and yet also making the support available to help industry groups and governments to actually understand what this guidance looks like in practice within their specific areas of priority or within the sectors that they are working. So this is all wonderful. And in terms of sort of practical application, I'm actually going to go back to Mons now, and I have two questions for you, but I'm going to sort of collapse them into one, Mons, because of the nature of time. And in your presentation, you did already touch on why it seems that more investors are looking at ESG. You know, you mentioned environmental, you mentioned human rights, and so please feel free to expand on that a little bit more, why you see this motivation, this increased motivation, or how you see that playing out. But it would also be really great if you could provide sort of a concrete example of how investors, and it may be one of the tools that Osbil has created, but a concrete example of how investors can look at ESG or even SDGs to inform their investing decisions.
Sure. No, thanks, Tara. I think a good starting point for that question is actually to look at what really drives company value, right? So historically, if you look at the market capitalization of any listed company, it's often been driven by tangible assets. So in other words, things you see in a balance sheet. But then over time, we see that as market capitalization has grown, the tangible assets haven't grown at the same pace. There's a gap there. So something else must be driving these valuations. And we call them intangible drivers. So the proportion of intangible drivers as a percentage of a total market capitalization of a company has increased over time. And I don't have a slide on that here, but I know EY, for instance, the accounting firm, they've done a lot of studies on that, and they can show that very well graphically and see how the intangible drivers have this increase in importance. So what are these intangible drivers? And well, I would say they are things like corporate governance, customer relationships, company culture, supplier relationships, etc. So a lot of things which I would then broadly divide into E, S, and G factors, particularly the S. S is very strong there. And these are things that are not easy to put a value on, like in terms of in numerical terms or a dollar value. But if we as investors want to understand a company we invest in, we need to understand how those intangible drivers are managed by the company. And this is why we often want companies to publish reports on sustainability matters, because we think that's really important. And it comes back to what I mentioned before about having these better informed investment decisions. And that's one factor, right? The other factor, I think, is that the world is changing at a very fast pace at the moment. And we as investors, we want to make sure that the companies we invest in, they're adapting to a changing world. So for instance, we see inevitable decarbonization of the world economy, driven by the Paris Agreement, and then in turn, which will also be driven by technology change, but also government policy on climate change, and also changing capital flows. So everything is pointing in that direction. So we want companies to be able to explain what are the risks and opportunities coming out of that environment for them. And then, as I mentioned before, we are becoming more and more interested in the S of ESG as an industry, I think. And at least speaking for Australia, I can say that there have been quite a few cases there where there have been corporate failures, corporate blow-ups, and they've often related to cultural issues and sometimes corporate governance issues too. So I think investors who don't look at ESG, they do so at their own peril. So I think that there are a lot of different drivers behind this. And then I mentioned the SDGs before and how they're backed by the principles for responsible investment. And the PRI, for those who don't know, it's the biggest body for responsible investments in the world. And last time I checked, I think it was January this year, they had something like $90 trillion in assets under management. So it's a coalition of a lot of different investors. We've been a signatory since 2016. And that part of the investment world has grown massively, like in the last decade. And I think it will continue to grow as well. And what else was I thinking? Yeah, so all I'm saying is I think a lot of the non-financial drivers are actually financial drivers at the end of the day. You might not be able to put a dollar figure on something right today, but eventually they will manifest themselves in financial terms. And this is why we want to understand how companies are changing to adapting to a changing world. We want to understand the risk and opportunities in the companies we invest in, and we also want to reduce the risk of capital destruction. This is why we are active as investors and speaking to the companies we invest in. So that's just that. Yeah. So maybe that answers the first part of your question. So if I go to the second part, then Tara would be, well, I think the SDGs, they can guide you, right? Like they can guide me as an investor, they can guide a company, but ultimately we've had engagement on ESG issues before the SDGs. So a lot of engagements we have with companies is because we think they're material issues for us as investors. They can be climate change, they can be gender diversity, they can be human rights, etc. They do align with SDGs, so they're linked to that. And but I might just finish off before we run out of time, just to give you a few examples of how we've used our proprietary ESG research in practice, because it is, yeah, it's a bit hard to explain sometimes. But I'll give an example of 4 years ago. By trawling through social media, I found anecdotes about underpaid workers in the franchising industry here in Australia. This had not been covered by the media. Obviously, the company itself was not volunteering that information. And I think that this points to the importance of actually going the extra mile as an investor. You can't just rely on sustainability reporting. You have to do extra investigations yourself. But anyway, this company was trading at a price to earnings ratio, which is of about 60 times, which is very high compared to the market, which is maybe 15 times. So we thought it wouldn't take much for that bubble to burst, and we avoided that company. In our long short fund, we even took a short position, meaning we actually benefit from a share price falling. And we took that position, and then about a year later, media started to write about these issues, and the share price tanked. It almost fell 50% in the next couple of months. So that's a practical example of how you can use ESG to your own advantage. But that's an extreme case. Now, I only want to flag it because it highlights how we have to go over and beyond company reporting. But in practice, my team sets ESG scores on every company in our universe. We also have like an ESG SWOT analysis, which then is given to the analyst, the stock analyst, who then take that into account in his or her final investment recommendation. So there's a systemic process behind it. And we think it's a very important part of our investment process, because ultimately, like we've seen what's happened in companies that haven't managed these issues well. So it's up to us to find those risks and opportunities before it's too late.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for all of that. And actually, just a really quick follow-up question, because you did mention the Modern Slavery Act. And so I was curious, when you're looking into how companies are managing these issues, and are you looking at things like the statements, the modern slavery statements that companies have to publish? Is that something that you're actually looking to? Yes,
I will. And yes, by way of background there, so I'm on a panel of experts advising the federal government here in Australia in terms of the effective implementation of the Modern Slavery Act. And I've been part of that journey throughout the whole consultation process. And yes, we will look at the Modern Slavery Act statements. Although, again, I think you can't just stop there. The way I look at a TCFD statement or a Modern Slavery Act statement or a sustainability report, it's sort of like a starting point for further discussion. Right. So it's important, but it's not everything. Like there'll be a lot of dialogue around that too. But yeah, that will keep me busy next year when they come out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Mons. And Brian, so we've just been hearing about how interest from investors is growing, but certainly there are a lot of other stakeholders that businesses have to consider, right? There's legislators, there's consumers. So it would be great to hear from you. And again, I'm going to sort of partner a couple of questions, but how you think Coca-Cola is not only responding directly to your stakeholders, but also, do you feel, or what are you doing to influence maybe your peers in this space, other business within the region?
Yeah, I guess we are a marketing company, and I don't think we are doing that good as a marketing, role to promote the human rights or sustainability programs. So I think at the beginning, when we start doing this, we kind of break it into some very, very small pieces to our suppliers to understand. So for example, when we first started, we just say you comply with the local law. Okay, we never bring the word like OECD, UNGP, you know, because for them, they don't understand. For us, that is so hard to, let's say, you know, you try to be a good person. It is so hard to, if people will say, yes, I'll be a good person, but you tell them how to do it, and they probably say you just buzz off, right? So, and so that is how difficult it was when we started like 15, 20 years ago. And when we were getting there, breaking into small chunk, just go into the small things and like be compliant with the law, and we'll start promoting it, training them, understand the law. I mean, in China, it was exceptionally difficult because the law is so complicated. I mean, it looks very simple, but it's very complicated in interpretations in many different ways. So, so that is somehow that the due diligence process really helping us to drive and to work with the external stakeholders to share learning, to what we know, and then to bring it to the operations. So we host supply events in different countries to build capacity, you know, the HR and the ESG professionals within the regions, and we help them to understand. The company also proactively identify the salient issue in each regions, right? So we bring people together to understand what is your problem. I mean, what do you see is your problem in the human right aspect? So we bring people in, and they brainstorm and they figure out, okay, this is the things that we need to do. And when you talk about a migrant worker, this is something that we've been working for the last 5 years. I mean, probably IOM interest, that it is so hard to crack. I mean, a company like us is similar to the child labor situations like 15, 20 years back. By yourself, you're not able to do anything. You just keep saying that no equipment fee, no passport. At the beginning, we just know that, oh, passport holding is something from our supply chain. And it's, oh, no passport holding, that's easy, right? So, I mean, take us a couple years to fix that. And then once we fix that passport, and then the next thing is the equipment fee. And we all of a sudden realize the equipment fee is so complicated. So we work with stakeholders, we work with RBA and other organization, LGRR. I mean, we so many alphabet soup put together, and through IOM, of course, that to work to resolve the situations in some corridor, like in Malaysia, that is there are supply chain have migrant workers that's still paying equipment fee. Of course, we have some success story there, and then a region called Taiwan that is also having some issues that because it's not part of the UN, it's so difficult to deal with. And I mean, that's mean when we have to constantly engage with brands. We are a member of the CGF, Consumer Good Forums. My boss is a co-chair of the Human Rights Coalitions, working to end forced labor. And then we have a very good bottling system like Australia. We have Coca-Cola Amatil. They are, you know, because of the Australian modern slavery law, and they really jumping into it and try to supporting us on the supply chain. So there was a lot of stakeholders working together to support it. So I'm not sure I did answer your question, but I think the thing is we constantly evolve and constantly engage and constantly looking for opportunity to improve in a way for our programs.
No, thank you so much, Brian. And I think that was the perfect answer, right? Because, I mean, to your point, you're never going to be perfect, right? You're never going to be at that 100% target. And so you're recognizing that there are constantly emerging issues and emerging understanding in this space. And so it's important for business, for our communities to be able to respond. And I also really appreciate you flagging, you know, how the discussions have shifted from compliance, right? Just meeting the legal floor, and how with a lot of these issues, noting the complexity, noting with recruitment of workers where there are multiple legal jurisdictions involved, that actually you need to encourage your partners to exceed, you know, the existing legislation in some places, and that brings its own challenges. But the other important note that you highlighted, and which has been, you know, a theme throughout the presentations and discussions, has been the importance of industry groups, right? And joining together with associations, whether you're becoming a participant of UNGC or joining one of the OECD initiatives, or, you know, joining the leadership group for responsible recruitment, or RBA you mentioned, or CGF, right? The wonderful thing about these groups is they give all of us more leverage, right? More influence over our partners. So thank you so much, Brian. Unfortunately, I don't have I don't have time for a second round of questions for all of you. But in the very few minutes remaining, I would love to do a rapid response where each of you gives one tip to a company that is looking to either make a new or updated commitment to sustainability. So yeah, what's your one tip? What should each of us do after this? And Brian, you're on stage right now for me, so you okay to go first?
Let me just get there. Well, we started the journey like 15 years ago. It requires the senior management's commitment and support, right? So we are very, very lucky to have senior management support and full support. And ESG is not another system, not a project. It cannot be written a few documents and put it on a shelf or frame it on a wall. Or it is not even a philanthropy exercise to give donations or send staff to community work and collect those trophies for your office. So you must take a deep look of your operations, your supply chain, where it needs the most, and start from there. And for those don't have much experience, define your scope, setting the tone, setting the minimum expectation and compliance target. You should develop a responsible sourcing policies that integrate the UNGPs, OECD, an approach to link to SDGs. So and then start the diligent process. Do some work and not just say it. And process your operation and get your first tier suppliers. Gradually move to the deeper supply chain and make improvement and mitigate your risks. And organization like Sedex and other service providers can provide you with professional tool and supports you may get started. I think In Progress also have some good tools in the websites that you can start your journey and commit what you can and take actions to fulfill your commitment. That's what I can say.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. Yeah, make the commitment, do a deep dive, improve business processes, and definitely don't be shy about joining groups like Sedex and others for access to tools. Excellent. Meng Liu, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Tara. I love such type of questions. And as our conversation has been reached lunchtime, I would say stay hungry for sustainability. And it's never too late to start. Start from small. It doesn't necessarily to be big, and start now. And we are ready at the UN Global Compact. Are you ready? And look at the view of the SDG that was on my hand. The wheel of the SDG needs to roll, so be the activist for our shared future. Join the UN Global Compact, speak with Sedex and other partners, do your sustainability work today. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Jing.
Thanks. So absolutely agreed with Tara, you already said in the beginning, and also Brian again reminded us, this is no longer a philanthropy approach to do RBC. And also there are a lot of changes in the market. So it's not a heads up, it's actually happening. The Modern Slavery Act in Australia was mentioned, and that's also happening in the UK. And in France, where the OECD headquarters sits, I mean, we have a due diligence law entered into effect since 2017. And then there is no doubt to say that there will be more and more expectations, if we don't use the word requirement, I mean, for business to really have very concrete responses. So I will just really encourage business to look at the outward risks rather than the risk internalized, like a reputational risk. But when I say the outward risk, these are the issues covered by the responsible business conduct, like the risk to the environment, the risk to the human being and to the society. So when you integrate this risk into the core of business activity and supply chain management, I think that it's not going to lead you to the different direction from from achieving to SDGs and to the sustainability.
Great, thanks, Jingjing. And Mons, again, last but not least.
Thanks, Tara. Well, I'll try to make it in 30 seconds then. We have talked about a lot of good things here. I think collaboration was the one thing I was going to say. So now that's been taken, I would say this. I would say as an investor, I believe that what gets reported might get managed. So I'll start there. And I think it's really important with the reporting. That said, I don't think there's a need to feel the pressure to report a 100-page report. Start by thinking, what is the most material ESG issue to us? And then try to set targets and then report against those targets going forward. And I think transparency is also key. And I would say this, it's better to be transparent about a challenge than not saying anything at all, because investors will ultimately make up their own minds anyway. So it's better to be in charge of a narrative.
Great. And I think that's a wonderful and really practical sentiment to end on, right? That, everyone who has joined today, everyone who is tuned in is here because we care about sustainability, and we either want to start the work and start to do it more proactively, or we want to improve what we're trying to already. And I think all of us recognize that it's difficult, it's complicated, it's hard, but we are all in this together. And so, I just want to thank everyone again. I want to thank Sedex for hosting this. I want to thank all of our speakers today who just brought such a wealth of experience, expertise, and resources to our attention. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in at this time.